But Kathy, family obviously cared deeply about the both of you because on their album "A Song for Me," the two of you they dedicated one of the dedications on that album were to the both of you, and I think that kind of at least showed to me how much they dearly cared about you guys.
Yes, and we cared deeply about them as well. It was very mutual. And I think that was a true indication of the deep connection that we shared with the band family.
Yeah.
Classic pop culture. It's classic pop culture. Hosted by Steve, Ludwig, and Ludwig. It's classic pop culture. It's classic pop culture. It's classic pop culture.
Thank you, Joe Mandica, Australia's gift to the world of pop music. Joe is the writer, performer, and producer of our classic pop culture theme song. And Joe is a true friend of this show. Speaking of true friends of the show, how are all of you doing? Here we are. Show number 176 of Steve Ludwig's Classic Pop Culture, right here at planetludwig.com. All the way since 2013, we've been doing the shows. You've landed safely and peacefully right here at Planet Ludwig, and our guest, musician, author, Kathy Bushnell, has her place secure in music history. Kathy was one half of the first female rock duo in Britain. Their name was Emily Muff. And yes, I believe we will be talking about that name, Emily Muff. But this duo's star shined from the late 60s to the early 70s, and stories of how Kathy and her bandmate Janet bucked the male-oriented music business of the 60s and 70s despite heavy obstacles to achieve their dream of playing live in Royal Albert Hall is inspiring. Now, very little recorded material of Emily Muff's musical career exists, but here's a brilliant 4-minute medley provided to us by our guest Kathy. Enjoy it, and then Kathy Bushnell joins us on the other side of the medley. so often while doing this show, I get to speak with a true pioneer in the field of music. And that is certainly the case with our guest, Kathy Bushnell. In the late 60s, early 70s, she and her bandmate were the first female rock duo in Britain. The first. And as you just heard, they made exquisite music with their instrumentation and spot-on harmonies. The road to success certainly twisted and turned for the Emily Muff duo. It's an inspiring story, at times sad, but mostly uplifting and funny. Welcome to Classic Pop Culture, the wonderful Kathy Bushnell. Hi, Kathy. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Steve. It's great to be here.
It is such, I feel so honored to be speaking with you because of your place in music history. It's just a thrill.
Well, I'm thrilled being here, so the feeling's mutual.
Thank you. I want to let our audience know, too. Guys, Kathy went so far and above the call of duty. I had to postpone the interview. She was fine with it. Let me know when, Steve. Kathy's been sending me photos that you'll be seeing throughout this, and she was just the greatest pre-guest anyone would want. And so thanks for your efforts that way as well, Kathy.
Oh, well, thank you.
Now, you mentioned... especially when we were communicating before this. And one more thing, listeners, you're going to be hearing me rustling papers. I have so many notes that I want to get to with Kathy. It's such a great story. But you mentioned, Kathy, how it was important to you to discuss how the word duo was important when describing you and your bandmate as the first female rock duo in Britain. Do you want to elaborate on that?
Yes. That would be great. Appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
I want to start with our lineup, which we handled quite a few different instruments, just the two of us. So we had two Fender Telecaster electric guitars, a Rickenbacker 12-string electric guitar, keyboards, flute, and I also played different Hohner blues harmonicas. I played a mean blues harp. So
you sure did.
I loved doing that. And so to me, being a female duo is different than a band. Mm-hmm. I love bands, but still the focus is only on the two of you. You've got to be spot on from the moment you begin to play. So it's a huge responsibility. I'm not saying that people in bands don't have to be spot on. That's mm-hmm. I assume they are, but I just wanted to say it's different. It was a huge responsibility.
It's you, yes, it's you too. It's not five people that people can be spreading their attention to on stage. It's the two of you right there, and you're under the microscope.
Yes, plus we performed our original songs and we never played a cover.
Yes,
either.
That's amazing to me. That is so brilliant on your part. I want to mention to all of our listeners and viewers, and they'll see, of course, the image on the screen, this really wonderful memoir, M and Moo, Legacy of a 60s Female Rock Duo, written by Kathy Bushnell. If I may quote something from the book, Kathy, and then please elaborate on this as well. You wrote, "A band's image was important from a business standpoint, but music was most important." Would you say that was the main obstacle that Emily Muff encountered, business versus just you and your bandmate wanting it to be music, all about the music?
Well, certainly during that era, we faced a lot of, being a lot of sort of sexism, and being the first female rock duo, people hadn't seen a lot of females toting Telecaster electric guitars.
You guys were rockers, weren't you, Kathy?
Yes.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, some of the music that was saved from that era of our female rock duo was some of our softer songs. So sometimes people think that, oh, were you a soft rock band? But we were really rocking out as best we could with just the duo. But yes, getting back to your question, I want to answer by saying we, had quite a few struggles. But I think the defining factor was Emily Muff's courageous, attitude, and the factor that we focused on was our music and sharing it with the world.
And reading through the book, Kathy, it's maybe now with our society the way it is, but in the '60s, the misogyny was so prevalent, and the fact that you two survived it, I can't tell you how. I want to say how proud I am of you, but just how I am proud of you, but just how much guts you guys had to stand up against the big shots.
We did, and sometimes it was to the disadvantage of our band.
How so?
I'll go into that later.
Okay, yeah, we'll go into that later.
We met the casting couch scenario at one of a major record label, and we refused to compromise our principles for a recording deal. And so we didn't, get that record deal. So I can sleep at night.
And yeah, you can look at yourself in the mirror, right?
Yes.
Yeah, boy.
So we made some tough choices, but we also knew, as trailblazing female rockers at that time, we were sort of setting the standards too for future female rockers, and so we really had to be very careful what we wanted to present.
Yes. In my intro, when I mentioned that you are indeed a pioneer in the world of music, I wonder how many female rockers, singers, not just rockers, but female rock singers of today realize if they were to trace things back, you, as a member of Emily Muff, really led the way with, if you don't mind me using the term as you've used it in the book, you rocker chicks, so to speak.
Sure.
You toughed it out, and you stood your ground, and you led the way for women to be viewed as equal in the music business.
Well, that's one reason I emphasize the word duo, because there were some other female rock bands even before us. And so I'll give an example. I found out not that long ago the Liverbirds were out of Liverpool, and it was a all female rock band. I Googled them and looked at a couple things about them,
right?
And they really were emulating the Beatles. So they had hairstyles like the Beatles. They wore suits like the Beatles. They played some Beatles numbers. And they also, I do believe, played some original numbers. But they were 63 to 68. And Janet and I co-founded our rock duo in 68. So, and then, of course, there were bands, the American band Goldie and the Gingerbreads. But that, again, was an all-female, band.
Yeah,
So, and then they did come, I think, and tour in Britain before we did. So there were certainly other women, but that's one reason I focus on the word duo as well.
Yeah, well, I'm sure I'll come back to this more and more, but being the duo, you two were under the microscope a lot more than a five-piece band so that alone, took guts. So. Well,
yes, and let me make another point since we're talking about this. The women in, let's say, female singers of that era, both across the pond and in Britain, and some female rockers, some of them were married to their manager or sleeping with members of their band or a member of the band. And so they had sort of a built-in protection, safety of the seedier side, of the rock music scene.
Very good
and
point.
Janet and I were 3,000 miles away from New York, where we had, grown up, and we loved Britain, and so we were really alone in many senses, in many ways. So it was a totally different ballgame for us than a lot of the women who were in the rock music arena as well.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned the instruments, some of the instrumentations, but if I know you've told this story a million times, but can you go back a bit and tell us how you started with your music career and with how it led to Emily Muff? And I'm going to just leave it to you because you tell it so well in the book, and I'd love you to share it with our audience right now.
Okay, well, I love to share it with you and your audience. So from an early age, I had been taking piano lessons, classical piano lessons.
What age are we talking about, Kathy?
Well, actually, I started about age 8 years old.
Oh, my goodness. Okay.
And then we moved to New York City. My father was teaching at Vassar College in upstate New York. But we moved to New York City, and so one of my main piano teachers, he taught at the Mannes College of Music. He actually gave lessons there, rather. And so they had, instead of recitals, they had performances in the college theater. So I remember that one woman who I ended up having to audition and play with, I should say, was Van Cliburn's mother. And she's the one who taught her son, Van Cliburn, to play the piano. She was an amazing pianist. Yeah. So luckily she gave me a good review, but that was a lot of pressure.
I can imagine.
I was probably 10 or 11 at the time.
Mm-hmm.
I also, in terms of my background, was from the age of around 10, I was in a professional New York City modern dance company, Paul Sanasardo Danya Foyer Company, and we performed in theaters around Manhattan. So during that time, I was required to act very professionally from an early age and to endure long hours at rehearsals and expected to perform with perfection. So I'm explaining this because these sort of rules and expectations were a norm, were the norm for me from an early age. And then later, when I was a teenager, I attended the High School of Performing Arts in New York City, and I was actually a dance major, and I performed on stage at a couple of concert halls there in 65 and 66.
Wow.
Okay, so in answer to your question, Janet and I, my bandmate Janet and I, we didn't, and she also had performing experience, but we didn't go to Britain naively thinking, okay, we're just going to, suddenly be able to play and perform in front of thousands of people. So that's one reason we were able to, as a duo, open major concerts for the band's family and quintessence throughout the UK.
You mentioned family. We'll get to this a little later as well, but I was happy and privileged to speak with Roger Chapman a couple of months ago as well, from the lead singer of Family. So it's a nice little circular thing we're doing here. Kathy, this may sound like a rhetorical question, but attending the School of Performing Arts, as you did, and learning dance and moves on stage, that must have come in handy during your career with Emily Muff.
Well, absolutely. All of the performing experiences do. But attending the School of Performing Arts, there was a high level of expectation. There was 4 hours of dance a day, and then you'd go have lunch in the beginning, first 2 years.
Oh,
it was heavens. 4 years I was there. And then in the afternoon, you would have all your academics. And so...
How do you stay awake?
Pardon?
How do you stay awake for your afternoon classes? My gosh.
We were expected to be ready for our first dance class at 8 a.m. in the morning. So it was, but again, I was used to this because I had, at an earlier age, been a member of a modern dance company, that performed.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So at Hunter College, Playhouse and at the 92nd Street Y. Both of them were very popular venues for, dance and music.
Now, throughout our talk here, Kathy, I'm going to be referring to your book with your memoir, Em and Moo. I love, first of all, even if you were not in such a pioneering rock duo, Kathy, your book would have been fine just for the way you relate things that happened in the 60s and late 60s and early 70s. It's just so wonderfully. I love your narrative style, and there's something. One of the things with this narrative style that I love the way, Kathy, that you would lead up to a reveal of someone you're talking about, but you don't give away whom it is right away. I'd like to read right out of the book, and listeners, you're going to love this, and then I'll leave it up to Kathy if she wants to give the reveal who she was talking about in the book. But here we go. This is from the book, Em and Moo, by Kathy Bushnell. I glanced around again and noticed that the guy standing not too far from my brother and me seemed lost in thought. There was a rugged, almost brooding quality to his demeanor that was quite intriguing. As I continued to peek at him through the curtain of my wavy blonde hair, I scrutinized him further. A longish face, sexy brown locks covering his eyebrows, slender build, stovepipe trousers, dark-colored vests. And now we're wondering who it may be, but Kathy does this more than once in the book leading up. Kathy, I'll leave it up to you if you want to share with whom you were speaking about.
Sure, I'd be glad to share that. In actual fact, I'm writing as it happened. So I'm trying to, in my book, Em and Moo, Legacy of a 60s Female Rock Duo, what I do is take readers on a journey as to, through what happened. Mm-hmm. And so this is what I saw. I saw this person who you're describing, or I described in my memoir, and I looked again, and I realized it was rocker Keith Richards of the Rolling Stones.
Oh, brother.
And that's one of the reasons I had begged my brother to take me to the club. I was only 16. I was underage. Mm-hmm. And the radio DJ, when I was doing my homework, my algebra homework that evening, had said there's a rumor that the Rolling Stones were going to be at the Phone Booth Club in Midtown Manhattan tonight. So I wrote down Phone Booth Club next to, as I say, a quadratic equation. And I immediately, asked my brother to take me, and we were young and living with our parents in an apartment in Manhattan. And my parents were blind, and my mother used to listen to the radio a lot. Mm-hmm. And so she knew all the bands, who they were, so that was kind of cool, really amazing.
Yeah.
And so they gave us permission to go as long as I stayed with my brother at all times. So my brother had gone to the men's room at the time. I'm standing at the bar, and so I see a guy who I'm positive is, Keith Richards, because I had studied him a lot as an Anglophile and fan of the Stones. So I turned to him and I said, "Are you Keith Richards?" And he turned to me slowly, looked at me, and he said, "No, I'm not."
Wow.
So it sort of slammed me in the solar plexus, metaphorically speaking. Mm-hmm. But he had answered me in the British accent, and I knew it was him, and that confirmed it to me.
Sure.
So what I did was, I knew my brother was coming back soon, and I wanted to have this private split-second tete-a-tete with Keith Richards.
Right.
And so I turned back to him, and I said something like, "Well, I really dig Keith Richards' guitar solo on Heart of Stone, man. It's really groovy, man." Mm-hmm. And I waited, and he turned back to me. And he gave me a beautiful smile, and he said, Thanks, Love.
Wow. Right?
And we both knew I had blown his cover.
Yeah.
And then we met. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, and man, how he must have appreciated the fact that a fan actually talked about his music to him. Rather than, oh, you're so gorgeous, Keith, which is, come on, Kathy, that's what you were thinking inside.
Absolutely. I actually talked with Bill Moyman that evening, too.
Oh, brother.
And then Brian Jones, I'm so glad I met him at that time. Brian Jones was there with Anita Pallenberg, and I told Brian about what I liked about, his music and, his harmonica and guitar, and I also, told Bill how I liked his riffs, his bass riffs. So they seemed very, especially Brian seemed very kind of surprised that I was, talking about his music rather than how well he made music in bed in my fantasy or something. So.
Right. Kathy, one of the things that endeared me to you and your bandmate that I learned in this book, early on in the book, was how the two of you actually had the guts to move to Britain at that young age. Did you have the backing of your families, or how did that go?
Well, I have to start a little bit before that, because Janet and I met her in college, and we had actually traveled on holiday to France, Scandinavia, and Britain in 1967. So, during that famous Summer of Love, we actually bumped into, by chance, Martin Stone of the Savoy Brown Blues Band in Denmark. He invited us to his gig, and then he also invited us to crash at his communal flat in London. And we actually spent a month living there. So Janet and I also met other musicians and artists at this communal flat, and by summer's end, we were very sad to leave the UK. But, we were young and our tickets were already booked, and our parents were waiting for our return, so we boarded the plane for New York. And what I'm going to say actually happened. As our plane was tacked down the runway for takeoff towards New York, the two of us made a vow to officially move back to London. And we chose the random date of February 3rd, 1968. Janet and I actually moved back across the pond on that exact same date that we had chosen.
Boy, talk about sticking to your guns.
That's right, and it was a gutsy move. I agree with you. It was a gutsy move, but it was clear to my friend Janet and me that we both belonged back in London. We had fallen in love with London.
Another thing that endeared me to you and the story that you had to tell was the naming of your band, Emily Muff, was suggested by a member of the band family, and neither you nor Janet caught on to the kind of naughty implication of the word muff. Can we talk about that?
Yes, and it's kind of embarrassing because I have to admit that Janet and I were 17 and 18 years old, and we had not heard about the sleazy connotation of the word muff. So that's why we didn't catch on to the naughty implication of the word when we were dubbed Emily Muff. But we did actually, I have to admit, think that the name Emily Muff had sort of a quirky ring to it. And so we kind of liked it a little bit, So at the same time that family gave us the name Emily Muff, they dubbed Janet the nickname M-E-M, and said that I will be called Moo, M-O-O. So I wasn't thrilled about the bovine connotation of my nickname. However, what's interesting is that we kept the name Emily Muff and our nicknames, and family was calling us by our nicknames. And then, lo and behold, Janet and I started addressing each other as Em and Moo. So it was really quite funny. And I ended up naming my memoir Em and Moo.
Yes.
So,
and again, everybody, beautiful, wonderful memoir, Em and Moo, Legacy of a 60s Female Rock Duo, by our guest, Kathy Bushnell. Did you ever confront any of the members of family and say, what was on your mind? Why did you give us that naughty name?
well, what I want to just do is back up a moment.
Sure.
And say that in that era, so family had given our duo the name Emily Muff. And we had been planning, and we did, go to rehearse, and write songs and rehearse in South Wales, in St. David's on the coast there. Mm-hmm. So in those days, let me remind everybody, there were no cell phones, obviously, so no text messaging, and we didn't have a landline either. So
oh boy.
The first we learned about the actual connotation of the word muff, we were miles away from London, traveling on a train on our way to rehearsing in that cottage. So really, just in a sense, like how we had met musician Martin Stone,
What a musician.
Yeah, with Mighty Baby. Mm-hmm. At the time, he was with Savoy Brown Blues Band. But we came across musician Mike Stephens, also known as the Welsh Bob Dylan, on the platform in Cardiff, and we were going to change to a train to Haverford West. And so we started chatting with Mike, and he had just come from a recording session, and he played us some songs on acoustic guitar on the train. And
wow, very cool.
This is how we met. Jen and I ended up meeting a lot of people this way, just by chance or synchronicity. But when we told him about our rock duo, how we were going to be rehearsing in St. David's, Wales, he shook his head, his eyes opened wide, and he told us about the connotation of the word muff. Mm-hmm. That's the first time we learned about it. So in terms of confronting members of family with, about the name Emily Muff, after Janet and I returned from our rehearsals in Wales, we did confront family about the name. However, they just kind of brushed it off a bit. But by then, we found out that our duo had already been booked for an upcoming Emily Muff UK huge tour. Mm-hmm. And the publicity machine had already started, and Melody Maker ads, printed concert programs and tickets, etc.
But Kathy, family obviously cared deeply about the both of you, because on their album A Song for Me, the two of you, they dedicated, one of the dedications on that album were to the both of you. And I think that kind of at least showed to me how much they dearly cared about you guys.
Yes, and we cared deeply about them as well. It was very mutual. And I think that was a true indication of the deep connection that we shared with the band family.
Yeah.
When Janet and I saw the back cover of Family's album, A Song for Me, and that they had dedicated the album to, quote, you, comma, right. Emily Muff, and then a slew of other people who were important too, we just felt so honored. In fact, I have to say that I keep that album in my office with the back facing out.
Well, why not?
It makes me smile every day.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and that's forever, Kathy, right?
Yes, it is.
Speaking of albums, luckily for us, there's this brilliant 3-CD compilation of female singer-songwriters, Milk of the Tree, from Grapefruit Records, and right along Joan Baez, Melanie, Marianne, Faithful, Buffy St. Marie, so many others. Emily Muff takes their rightful place in this compilation. Can we talk about this, Milk of the Tree, this beautiful 3 CD compilation?
Yes, it's an honor to have an Emily Muff track called Pass the Night featured on this illustrious 3 CD compilation that was released in 2017.
Now, when did you find out that Emily Muff would be included, rightfully so, in this compilation, Kathy?
Well, actually, I found out quite late in the game there because I apparently Grapefruit Records had been trying to contact me, and I missed their email for some reason for several months. That's very unusual, but they kept doggedly trying to contact me, and finally, when I saw that they had, I immediately responded, and they asked if they could add our original song, Pass the Night, to it. And I think I was one of the last tracks to be able to be fitted into that 3 CD compilation. So I'm very lucky and very proud to be on it.
And Kathy, like you said, for you it was an honor to be included, but you, along with the rest of the female singer-songwriters, Emily Muff just belongs, and it's perfectly placed on the album that you're a part of it. And rhetorical comment here, but it's just got to be a thrill.
Absolutely. We were so honored to have that Emily Muff track featured on this 3 CD compilation.
I own it. It's part of my musical library now. And I also want to say, Kathy, there's a great booklet in it as well that talks about every band on the compilation. And it's just so well done by Grapefruit. And everyone, if you love music, you really must get this compilation. It's a great addition to your music library. So kudos to you, Kathy, for being on there.
And thanks to Grapefruit Records as well.
What a package. Yep, what a package by Grapefruit Records. Kathy, I do have a question. Just judging by the song Pass the Night, I would love to hear more Emily Muff music. Why is there so little available?
Good question. My female rock duo, Emily Muff, was approached by several record companies in the late 60s and early 70s. But obviously an album of Emily Muff originals was never released, nor was a single. So in retrospect, I think this was partly due to various misunderstandings and miscommunication with management that occurred. But I feel that it was also because Janet and I stood our ground, and we never compromised about our principles in exchange for sexual favors, and we also refused to be hyped as an anomaly by the music industry. And this is just one other example, and we could not be coerced into wearing outfits that we felt were not a reflection of our female rock duo.
Yeah. Kathy, luckily for us, all of us listeners, you've recorded some songs on your own, and I'd love for us to listen and watch a video of a couple right now, if that's okay with you. I thought we would start with In the Moonlight. What can you tell us about that one? And your songs in general, since Emily Muff.
Well, I first want to mention before discussing In the Moonlight that these solo songs that I've written were written some years later, and they also feature me on rhythm and lead guitar, keyboards, and my Hohner blues harmonicas, which I love, as you know. I really do still feel proud of the Emily Muff original numbers that my female rock duo wrote, but I have to say my newer solo songs are a bit different. They're just different. I like them both styles. But for example, the final one of the three that I think you're going to be featuring. Final one has quite a zippy commercial sound, and I kind of think to myself that maybe it's a metaphor for the Emily Muff hit single that never materialized.
We'll hear it. Yeah, I love the line in that song, by the way, which we'll hear later. Oh, baby, I'm on fire. Now, there's a commercial line if I ever heard one.
It is.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So back to the first number that you're going to play, In the Moonlight. This is a solo song that I've written and performed. I have been asked many times, is this song about anyone specific? So the answer to that is nope. Sorry to disappoint the tabloids.
I'm going to look back. I'm going to look back at the tabloids. I'm going to hold you to it, Kathy.
All right. I have to steel myself. So I would classify this song, In the Moonlight, as an altruistic love song. It's a sort of fantasy that expresses how I feel if I was in a relationship with someone amazing.
Well, listeners, let's check out the video now, Kathy. And I want to tell everyone, get ready. You're going to be swaying back and forth to this beautiful music. Here's Kathy Bushnell with In the Moonlight.
Every morning when I rise, I feel so happy you're in my life. Ooh, you bring out the best in me, and I cherish you so. Let me hold you, I'll never make you cry, and I won't desert you or tell you any lies. Ooh, I promise to stay by your side. I wanna love you in the moonlight. Ooh, the way you tease me and you tantalize drives me wild, and I wanna make you mine. Ooh, you bring out the best in me, and I cherish you so. Let me hold you, I'll never make you cry, and I won't desert you or tell you any lies. I promise to stay by your side, and I want you to love me tonight.
In the Moonlight by Kathy Bushnell. And the next song, I want to play one right away that we're going to feature, is Kathy's video, Can't Be an Illusion. And Kathy, you requested that we share this video here at this point in our conversation, as the lyrics remind you of both how you and Janet were kind of under the illusion that the road for Emily Muff would be much easier than it turned out to be.
dazzling smile lights up everything. Charismatic man, you went and stole my heart. All our synchronicities were off the charts. Laughing with you under the mesmerizing blue light hue, and then we go for a meal, rather Ferris wheel like lovers do. Kindred spirit, sharing all our dreams, but were those sexy pheromones not what they seem? Just an illusion, a fantasy, only an illusion. Your love for me, illusion. Oh no, can't be an illusion, can't be an illusion.
Can't be an illusion, and boy, the angst is palpable in that song, Kathy, as well as just one example of the two of you refusing to compromise your principles and having to deal with other negative aspects. I wrote a few down. Can I just kind of go down my list here, and you can comment on certain things that I wrote here? For instance, if it's okay with you.
Sure.
Now, keyboardist Tony Kaye's bandmate, upon meeting you, assumed that you must be a groupie. My goodness, how many times have you encountered something like that?
Quite a few times.
Yeah.
And in that particular example, I just wanted to add that Janet and I were living in a bedsit in the basement of musician Victor Brox, who was with the Ainsley Dunbar Retaliation. Mm-hmm. And next door to us, Victor rented another basement bedsit, and he rented it to Tony Kaye, mm-hmm. Who soon joined the band Yes.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So that's where we are, how keyboardist Tony Kaye's bandmate met us the first time.
Yeah. And you must be a groupie because you're a quote-unquote chick hanging around a rock band, right? My goodness, all
Correct.
The times you must have heard that. Yeah.
Yes. I answered the basement front door at that point, and this musician pushed past me like I was just a groupie.
Yeah. Boy.
So I remember saying to myself, just wait, we're going to knock your socks off.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. You knew what was in store.
Start touring.
Mm-hmm. Well, speaking of touring, when you made your first appearance at the Marquee Club, Kathy, the two of you had to endure being introduced as, quote-unquote, two lovely little ladies from America. How did that drive you crazy?
Well, that was on upon hearing that expression and us being introduced as such, I actually remember that I couldn't control myself and I winced overtly.
Yeah, like you've been punched
stage.
or something. Yeah. Oh my goodness. Yeah. But like pros, you just went on with it, and filed it.
Yep.
I guess filed it. Yeah, in the memory bank of what you're going to experience. Also, Kathy, many male members in the audience seem more interested in trying to get a glimpse of what you were wearing under your miniskirt versus you trying to get them to concentrate on your music. What? Oh, what do you say about that?
Well, absolutely. It was kind of bizarre to see some of the audience with their heads tilted sideways like that.
Goodness.
And in addition to that, in clubs, we also got cat calls. Hey, baby, let it all hang out kind of thing. And some people in the concert halls, some of the guys were also looking sort of sideways at us, although we could only see the first few rows, in the concert halls in the light.
But that was enough for you to realize what was going on, with some of the male members. Oh, man.
And may I add also that it was kind of difficult to deal with, especially during families' concerts. We'd be opening the show, and a lot of the women in the row in the audience would be applying their makeup during Emily Muff's set. So they just were that stopped after we had toured for a while and people got to know who we were.
After your reputation, after you got that great reputation, absolutely. Now, another thing, upon learning that you guys were from America, that your rock duo might be deported if Emily Muff continued touring in Britain, Family's management team required that you and Janet enter into a marriage of convenience, which wouldn't have been necessary had it been the other way around and you were guys. Wow. What about that?
That was one of the most devastating aspects that we're talking about that we had to deal with, especially since from the beginning, Emily Muff and members of Family and our manager, Tony, were focused on our touring. We weren't even thinking about visas or work permits or residency requirements.
Mm-hmm.
However, we still wanted to keep touring, and so despite the initial shock, Janet and I agreed to partake in a double wedding. We had a friend who had marriage of convenience, and she rounded up two of male friends of so-called husband, and they agreed to marry Janet and me in a double wedding. On the big day, I remember turning my cheek away from my so-called husband, and who he was then legally my husband, and we just.
This is unbelievable, Kathy. You're telling this story. I don't mean to interrupt, but you were forced to get married. I can't fathom it.
Well, it was a huge decision, and a lot of people might not have done that. But what I want to say is that this showed how much Janet and I wanted, were determined to keep on touring.
Absolutely. What it meant to you, what your music meant to you, the lengths that you were willing to go to, to a point,
Absolutely. Yep. And I want to add, kind of on a lighter note, that right after the double wedding, the wedding party, including our manager, went to see the Disney flick Fantasia, and we all were laughing because we thought it was a fitting end to such an occasion.
Yes, absolutely, yes. Wow. So what'd you do on your wedding night? Oh, well, we saw Fantasia.
Oh, well, I will answer that. Wait.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, since you mentioned that, so after the wedding, I don't know why, but the man that I was married to, named Alan, returned to we were living in a communal house at that time in Finchley, North Finchley area. And so, he was just hanging out with us after the movie, and so he rode with us or whatever back to the house. And he said to me something like, well, okay, let's go to the bedroom kind of thing. Those weren't his exact words. And I said, what? He said, well, you're my wife, aren't you?
Oh, boy.
I said, let me remind you, this was a marriage of convenience. So he left immediately after that. But so your sort of remark was really something I had to deal with.
Yeah, my God. And, I've said this a few times. I'm going to say it again. Everyone, Em and Moo, Legacy of a 60s Female Rock Duo. These stories and so many more are in this book. And Kathy, I mean, you're giving such great detail here, but there's so much more also, everyone, that you'll see when you get this book. Just amazing. Really amazing. Now, a slightly different line here, but it was also a surprise for you to discover that many people seem to assume that, well, these two women must be gay because they were a female rock duo. And to borrow a phrase from one of my favorite shows, Seinfeld, not that there's anything wrong with that, but I feel it's really a statement on the times of the 60s. What do you think? Well,
there's another saying that goes, somebody is straight but not narrow.
Right.
And that's, a saying that still continues through today. Mm-hmm. And Janet and I were straight but not narrow-minded. We were attracted to guys, and luckily we were not attracted to the same guys, so that was very helpful.
Yeah, that could be a problem within the band, within a duo, as a matter of fact.
So that was lucky. But in retrospect, I'm not quite sure why we were seen by some individuals as being gay. I think maybe it was because we weren't photographed in public, at least to my knowledge, with any boyfriends, or because it was obvious that Janet and I had an unusually strong, sort of intimate musical connection.
Mm-hmm.
And the way we would look at each other was very deeply or whatever, or concentrate on each other, which could have been misinterpreted as romantic connection.
Well, years later, you had a reunion with Martin Stone, and he shared something with you that I think is worth telling our audience. Could you share that with us?
Of course, that's fine. I wanted to mention that I had a reunion with guitarist Martin Stone about 7 years ago or so in London. And I was walking with him in Holland Park, and I mentioned, about some of the things we were just talking about. And he said, well, it wasn't just women that ran into these types of things or were being pressured for things like the casting couch scenario. I know bands where there were guys that were being pressured to sell themselves for record deals. So as you can imagine, I'm hearing this 50 plus years later that, guys in bands were being harassed as well and asked for sexual favors. I was very surprised.
Kathy, I guess just because of my naivete, I didn't even think that went on with guy band members, but I guess it does make sense. I mean, wow. What everyone had to endure, I guess, right? Both male and female at some points. Now, but getting to the cool part, well, there are a lot of cool parts of this interview, but the cool parts of your professional life. Emily Muff toured the UK with a number of bands, and one of them being Family. Oh, my goodness. Now, what was that like to open concerts for the band Family?
It was an absolute honor to open concerts for the band Family throughout the UK. Members of Family were actually our mentors, and my female rock duo shared a special heartfelt connection with them. To give you kind of an idea what it was like to tour with them, we would ride with members of Family up the M1 and other motorways throughout the UK, and we would open Family concerts all around the UK, and after Emily Muff's set, I would stand in the wings, and night after night on tour, I was mesmerized by Family's performance, which, of course, was always mind-blowing and amazing.
Mm-hmm.
So, Family was so popular in the UK that they sold out all of their shows.
Oh, yeah. They were incredibly popular. Yep.
So it was, all the concert halls were sold out. We did play some clubs and opened there for Family, and but we were mostly booked into large concert halls in the UK, which had seating capacity of over 2,000. Duo Emily Muff was touring with Family, our Telecaster and 12-string Rickenbacker guitars were plugged into Family's mega stacks of Marshall amps.
Wow.
The volume, yeah, you're not kidding.
Yeah.
And the volume was super loud. The concert hall was packed, as I said, and the excitement from the audience was palpable. We could actually feel the air energy as it sliced through the theater and reached our duo as we were performing our original numbers on stage. I'll give you two other examples, which were wonderful.
Yeah, please do.
Okay, I'd love to. Colston Hall in Bristol was one of our earlier concerts that we were opening for Family. And so at the end of our set, we were doing performing a two-guitar instrumental called Essence. And, of course, it was just soaring throughout this big concert hall. And as the notes finally faded away, the entire audience rose to their feet and gave Emily Muff a standing ovation.
Oh, how wonderful.
It was an incredible moment in my life.
Mm-hmm.
And so then Janet and I bowed to the audience and said, thank you very much. And then we ran to the wings. And who was standing in the wings but Roger Chapman of Family? And it looked like apparently he had been watching our set.
Oh,
and
boy.
I remember he clapped Janet and me both on our backs in a friendly way and said, girls, you're going to be a hard act to follow.
Oh, isn't that great? I mean, and what a feather in your cap, Kathy.
What a compliment from Roger Chapman of Family. You're not kidding.
And, well, I mean, that says all we need to know about Emily Muff, too, and your talent.
Wow. Well, thank you. And another example, after another concert in a different city, I was mobbed for my autograph by a crowd of male teenage Emily Muff fans.
Oh, fantastic. Wow. What did that feel like?
Well, my hand was aching, my wrist was aching because I signed so many autographs and for them in the Family Emily Muff program. programs, glossy photo of Emily Muff, and write their messages. They asked me for a specific, write one for me sister too, kind of thing. So
right. Mm-hmm.
It was fun. It was very, very heartwarming and just fun.
And I mean, I assume moments like that when you're signing those autographs, boy, how proud you must have been of yourself to stand up for what you believe in, too, to get to this point.
Yes. Well, actually, being mobbed for my autograph by a crowd of these male teenage Emily Muff fans came about in sort of a special way. The concert was over, and yet I was missing one of my harmonicas, which were very precious to me. And so I went back looking for it into the concert hall, and that's when I was on the stage. I realized my harmonica wasn't there, but the side door burst open, and that's when this crowd of the teenage male Emily Muff fans came running in the building screaming, "Emily Muff! Oh, it's her! Oh, my God!"
Oh, it's her.
And they surrounded me and, asked for autographs. So had I not gone back
right.
to look for my harmonica, I wouldn't have necessarily been mobbed. So I was the only one out of my duo that was mobbed that night.
Well, well-deserved mob scene.
It was heartwarming.
Yeah, oh my goodness. Kathy, I'd like to mention the names of some of the other bands that you hung out with or saw perform early on in your careers. I try not to be a jealous person, but you saw the Beatles at Shea Stadium. Wow.
Yes, and I almost did not because it was sold out. But luckily, my older brother had a friend who phoned him and said that he had 2 extra tickets. Would he like to go? And of course he said yes, and then my brother invited me. So It was amazing that I even got to be there. It was a once-in-a-lifetime experience. You couldn't hear that well. There were 50,000 fans, and lots of them were screaming. Mm-hmm. But as I said, it was a once-in-a-lifetime experience. I'm so glad I got to see them. I love the Beatles.
Now, earlier, Kathy, you mentioned about seeing a few of the Stones at the Phone Booth Club, but that wasn't your only encounter with the Rolling Stones.
Yes, in addition to meeting those members of the Rolling Stones at the Phone Booth Club in Manhattan when I was 16, when I was in London, my female rock duo, Emily Muff, was invited by March and Stone again to add some vocals to Mighty Baby's album that they were recording at Olympic Studios in Barnes. In London.
And Kathy, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but that incident shows all of us how respected you were and Emily Muff with the vocals and your professionalism, that you would be asked by Martin Stone to provide vocals on one of the.
Well, what's really interesting also along the same lines. It was Mighty Baby too that invited us, not just Martin.
Right.
But the more we got to know the various bands that we toured with and hung out with, the more they started asking Janet and me for our professional feedback on their music and songs.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. Now
it changed over time.
Mm-hmm. Now, earlier, Kathy, you mentioned that you and your brother had met a few members of the Stones at the Phone Booth Club, but that wasn't the only time you yourself were in contact with the Stones.
Yes, that's correct. After I moved to London, I came across the Rolling Stones several different times and hung out with Mick and Keith at the Speakeasy, at the Speak. and met them at other times as well, as I tell about more in detail in my memoir, Emily Muff.
Jimi Hendrix experience. I'm going to just go down my list here. The Jimi Hendrix experience.
Okay, well, actually, this is before we were touring with Family, but Family was billed on that same show with the Jimi Hendrix experience at the Woburn Music Festival. And Family got phenomenal reviews, by the way. Their set that day was out of sight. Mm-hmm. I was very close to the stage. In fact, I was leaning up against it when the Jimi Hendrix experience started playing. And Jimi Hendrix was absolutely amazing, incredible guitarist, as we all know. Mm-hmm. But what was interesting to me, though, was that Mitch Mitchell and Noel Redding, who were part of his trio, were a tight, mind-blowing trio. That's what I took away from that as well.
Yeah, you could see the professionalism of the three of them together. How about Pink Floyd at the UFO Club?
Well, at that particular time, apparently Pink Floyd was one of the house bands at the UFO Club. This was in 1967.
Wow.
And it was the first time I heard Pink Floyd. And I remember being very fascinated by Syd Barrett's inventive guitar and all the lead riffs he was doing. Mm-hmm. In fact, what also was interesting was that he was sitting down at that time and hunched over his guitar, focused on his playing, and he was sort of jamming as well. And he wasn't really focused on the audience, and I thought that was very interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was 1967, you said?
Yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Because I believe the UFO Club folded in the fall of 1967, sadly.
Yeah. How about Dave Mason?
Well, Dave Mason was directly connected with Family, having produced their album Music in a Doll's House. And just to back up a little bit, I have a reason for doing this. And when Janet and I moved to Britain, actually moved there, we contacted our friend Martin Stone, and he had been living at that time in a house with his new band, Mighty Baby, and they were living on Lots Road near the Chelsea Embankment on a street which also had the communal house where members of Family were living, as well as Victor Brox, who was played cornet and keyboards and organ with the Ainsley Dunbar Retaliation. Mm-hmm. So when Family heard that Janet and I were writing songs together in our basement bedsit through the Lots Road grapevine is how they heard about it, they immediately invited us to come and play them a tune of our original numbers. So we did have a sort of informal audition for Family, and Dave Mason happened to be there that day. This was in Family's front parlor of their house. And I remember Dave Mason was sitting in sort of a far corner, and he was listening intently as well. After we auditioned that day for Family in the room and we were finished, Family indicated that they loved our music and that they wanted us to tour with them, and that we needed to speak with their manager, Tony. And then Dave Mason chimed in and said, "So what's the name of your band?" And so we told them, this is before we were dubbed Emily Muff by Family, so we told Dave Mason and the members of Family who were in the room that we had thought about different names but had not come up with one that we liked. And so one of Family said, "Don't worry, we'll think of a good one for you girls."
Didn't they?
And they did.
That they did. How about now Chicken Shack with Christine Perfect?
that was an amazing gig to see because, again, our friend Martin Stone had invited Janet and me to go see Christine Perfect with Chicken Shack. She was an amazing inspiration for me. And this was pretty early on before we were touring as a rock duo. The fact that Christine was a female frontlining a blues band, so she was singing, she's a songwriter, keyboards, was just such an inspiration for me. And she was actually doing what I wanted to do. You know, she was already there writing and performing and frontlining a band.
Yeah.
So that was one of the most, amazing and wonderful gigs for inspiration that I experienced.
And for those who don't know, Christine Perfect is better known as McVie.
Yes, she went and married.
Right?
Married McVie.
John McVie, yeah.
John McVie, and became a member of Fleetwood Mac.
Yeah. Wow.
So I saw Christine Perfect earlier on. You know?
Yeah, sure. One of my favorites, The Crazy World of Arthur Brown.
Well, I saw him at the UFO Club, Janet and I did, and the thing I remember most about him was that he came swinging off from the side of the stage to center stage wearing a helmet that was spouting actual flames for his song Fire, Let It Burn.
You also, Blind Faith, you came in contact with.
Well, Rick Gretsch was the bassist for Family when we met Family, and he was an amazing bassist. He was phenomenal. I mean, I had seen other bassists as well who were wonderful, of course. But I was sad because Rick Gretsch left Family. I was very sad. On the other hand, I was happy for him that he was recruited, or as I like to say, stolen by the supergroup Blind Faith. So I sort of have mixed feelings about that, but I was proud of him that they loved his bass playing too, that he made it into a supergroup is amazing.
Yeah.
But I loved him with Family too.
Yep. Jefferson Airplane.
Jefferson Airplane I had seen in the States. They came over to Britain in, I believe it was September of '68 on tour. And so Janet and I were going to meet with our friend Jeff Dexter. He was the DJ and for that show. And anyway, we were outside the Roundhouse and making our way towards the backstage entrance to meet with Jeff Dexter, and someone was tapping me on the shoulder, and I turned around, and it was Grace Slick and Marty Ballin of Jefferson Airplane, and I thought to myself, like, what are you doing outside the venue? You're supposed to be
the show's in there.
for your show. Yeah, right. So Grace explained to Janet and me that they had just landed in Britain and were starving. They hadn't had anything to eat. Could we drive them to an eatery nearby? And we didn't have a set of wheels, so Janet went and asked, looked for some friends of ours to ask, could they drive, Marty and Grace to get a quick bite to eat. While Janet was gone, I was chatting with Marty and Grace about how I love their vocals and their voices and their West Coast sound, and I really like Jorma's guitar too. It's phenomenal.
Yeah.
The whole band I really liked. So Janet got them a ride, and then I started telling Marty and Grace a little bit about my newly forming rock duo with Janet, and they were so enthusiastic. Oh, that's great. That's wonderful. You have a chick rock duo, and good luck. And they just were so
how
inspiring.
Nice is that? Yeah, boy. That's great to know a band who was established at the time, really was nice enough to take an interest and say, wow, boy, I'm so glad to hear stuff like that.
Yes.
Yeah. The Byrds at Middle Earth.
Okay. I had seen the Byrds quite a few times in the States, and I loved their harmonies, their songs, and Jim McGuinn's jangly guitar. He had a Rickenbacker, and he's one of our, influences because my chick rock duo.
Right.
Say, it did end up getting and performing with a 12-string Rickenbacker guitar of our own. So at that point in time, they were playing at Middle Earth in Covent Garden, and Graham Parsons had joined them, and he was quite countrified in a way, and so he was influencing the Byrds during that gig, and so they were playing a lot of their songs from their recent release at that time, Sweetheart of the Rodeo. I also did meet one of the Byrds that night, and he asked me out. So I dated him a little bit before they left for South Africa.
Oh, very cool. Very nice. How about T-Rex, another fave of mine?
T-Rex, to me, was very inventive, and Janet and I didn't get a chance to see them that much perform. However, we did. But to me, it was important for us to keep tabs on them, too, because they were essentially a duo. And so we had that in common. And I just thought that they were, again, so innovative.
Mark Bolan and Mickey Finn, if I'm correct. The Incredible String Band.
Well, it's interesting because Janet and I had been told by a lot of people that we looked similar to Mike Herron and Robin Williamson of the Incredible String Band in terms of she was dark-haired and I was blonde, and so even though the string band was not a duo, their girlfriends played with them, and our music was, very different as well, as we found out. It was interesting when we looked at their album cover, We, Tam, and the Big Huge. We were surprised to see, in a way, that we did sort of look like female versions of the string band physically.
Right, yeah.
So that was interesting and very funny. We did see the Incredible String Band. We went to a concert of theirs at the Albert Hall, and we were sitting down near the orchestra area, and when the concert was finished, we had enjoyed the show. They were much much more mellow sounding than Emily Muff, and their words seemed to be more about witches and fairies, things like that. And Emily Muff had a harder edge with some angst in it, in the vibe of Emily Muff's music. Yeah. But after the show, it was slow going, exiting the concert hall, and Janet and I were both admiring the Albert Hall's interior, and we looked up at the rotund arena and at all the tiers of seats and everything, and we both smiled at each other and said, "Ooh, wouldn't it be great for our duo to play a concert here at the Albert Hall?" And so we sort of made a vow to do that one day.
Great story about Ginger Baker, Kathy. Please share it with us.
Okay. Well, when Emily Muff was rehearsing at the Country Club in London, I arrived early at the rehearsal. I was by myself because I was so early. And I remember I was carrying my Fender Telecaster in its hard shell case, and I had a flute in its case, and my pockets were stuffed with my Hohner Blues harmonica, so I was pretty laden down.
Yeah.
And I went inside, and I thought I heard someone kind of playing around a little bit, softly sort of, but so I thought, well, I don't want to interrupt whoever's rehearsing in there, And so I knew in the back of the auditorium there, because we had rehearsed there before, that it was in the dark sort of way in the back. So I snuck in the back sort of and put my instruments down. And I sat down, and there I realized on the stage was one guy, and it was Ginger Baker. And he was adjusting his hi-hat, and then he started playing. And
he must have been great.
Yes, witnessing his solo, whatever you want to call it, rehearsal, he was playing with just as much passion as he'd had the day I heard him with Blind Faith. And I probably was there for 10 or 15 minutes witnessing, as I said, this incredible drumming by Ginger Baker solo rehearsal. So what I took away from that, besides being blown away, was that he was, to me, a true musician, because he played with passion when he didn't even have to be playing to an audience, even though there was an audience of one, me,
right.
which he found out soon, because afterwards I went down and chatted with him a little bit. He was a man of few words.
Yeah.
But I did tell him, that I was blown away by the drumming. So that was an amazing, again, a sort of a once-in-a-lifetime experience. Who gets to see Ginger Baker in a solo, practice/rehearsal session?
Yeah.
Not too many, I don't think.
No, not at all. He's produced the Beatles, the Stones, the Who, Led Zeppelin. Please tell us your Glyn Johns story, Kathy.
Well, Janet and I were in the studio with Glyn Johns at Olympic Studio in Barnes, and we were there at Mighty Baby's request that we add some vocals/harmonies to some of their tracks. The first one was called Winter Passes. It was later released on a Mighty Baby album called Live in the Attic. So here we were. Mighty Baby had asked us to at least put vocals on that one song, but they wanted us to hang around because they thought they would use us, to add vocals for additional tracks. So here we are at a Mighty Baby session, at Olympic, and Glyn Johns, and we were listening to the playback of the vocals we had added for Winter Passes, and sitting cross-legged on the floor in the studio. And
of course.
The two of us, and Mighty Baby was sort of around the mixing board with Glyn Johns. And so usually Janet and I are near the mixing board too, but at that point it was Mighty Baby's track, so we were just waiting to see if they wanted us to add, more vocals to other tracks. So Glyn Johns, who had been obviously recording and and producing records, obviously for all the well-known bands that you just mentioned and more, he was was very familiar with Olympic Studio, of course, and so he flicked the switch between the two studios. That studio and a nearby one at Olympic. And all of a sudden, we could hear this voice coming over the intercom saying, "Those girls' voices sound like Crystal, don't they, Mick?" Glyn Johns swiveled around, because he was at the mixing board, and swiveled around towards Janet and me and said something like, "Looks like girls, it looks like the Rolling Stones, like your vocals, or grooving on your vocals." I have it in my book, what he said.
Right.
And that's really what I remembered about being in the studio with Glyn Johns, and about, and the fact that he had been at Olympic recording for the Stones, at Stones sessions meant that he knew their voices too, so he
Yeah,
confirmed
right.
it. I mean, it could have been somebody else named, saying, "Don't they Mick to someone else,
Right.
another musician?" But he confirmed that it was the Stones. And several minutes later, the Stones did come in to send someone to come in and invite us into their session, and then Mick and Keith came to the door as well to invite us. That's all I'm going to say. The rest of that story is in my book.
Yes. Yeah. It's funny when I interview authors like you, and I always say, we have to leave some of the great parts in the book for people to buy it and read it. Guys, there are so many great stories that Kathy has to tell, and this is just skimming the top, this interview. Although I love what we've talked about, Kathy, but there's so much more in your book. You're so right. Now, Kathy, your rock duo had 2 different managers, and you still had to deal with those quote-unquote in power attempting to manipulate Emily Muff's image throughout your career. Luckily, your rock duo continued to evolve and you're no longer naive. You were standing your ground, and through it all came newfound freedom, and that's the phrase you used in your book, that allowed you and Janet to become even more selective in the direction that Emily Muff would take. For example, DJ Jeff Dexter invited Emily Muff to open for the band America at the Roundhouse. What was that like, and did you have any interaction with America?
Yes. Well, speaking of newfound freedom, we did have that, and so it allowed Janet and me to decide what gigs we wanted to accept or not, because we didn't have a formal manager saying, dictating what we needed to do. Mm-hmm. So when DJ Jeff Dexter, one of our friends, invited Emily Muff to open for the band America at the Roundhouse, of course we said yes.
Sure.
So we played and we opened the show, and then we hung around, of course, again, to hear America especially play Horse with No Name, their hit. Yep. And so afterwards I went backstage and I spoke with the members of America. And it's interesting to me because really the first thing they said to me was how surprised they were to see that Emily Muff had a harder edge than their band, America.
Yeah, that's very cool. Looking at the pictures, Kathy, I can see how people might think, gee, Emily Muff is, like you said, kind of like a folky type. But I said it before, you guys were definitely rockers at heart, I would assume.
Well, we were very, if you turn up past the night, I mean, those are not little cutesy songs, folk songs. Mm-hmm. That guitar is very powerful. Our harmonies are very powerful, and the flute is almost jazzy in a way.
And then Emily Muff next went on tour with the band Quintessence. What are your memories of that?
Well, it was an honor to tour with them as well. They were certainly a softer sounding band than, for example, Family. They were a very spiritual band as well. Janet was a friend of theirs, and she had sort of gotten into their spiritual kirtans and meetings, and they had given her the name Chandin. They called me Kathy. And they told Janet that we could tour with them, and they wanted us, our duo, to tour with them, but that they would not be billing us the name Emily Muff. It would be Chandin and Kathy. Mm-hmm. So luckily, my rock duo was fairly well known by then, so Janet and I wanted to tour again, so we decided to accept their invitation.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
So we ended up touring a lot of the same concert halls that we had in opening, concerts for Quintessence at some of the same venues that we had done so with the band Family. Mm-hmm. I have to admit that I like Quintessence's music, and it was wonderful touring with them. But I have to say that I miss touring with family and its rocking performances. That just was my preference. But thank you, Quintessence, for the invitation.
Now, so many of our listeners know about London's Royal Albert Hall. I mean, the Stones, Cream, The Who, Led Zeppelin, Pink Floyd, Bob Dylan, I could go on and on and on. They had performed there. And there's a special concert there, December 1971, that I'd love you to share with our audience.
Yes, I'd be glad to. Quintessence, during this tour that we were on with them, was having a final concert, and it was the Quintessence Christmas concert in December, as you said, of 71 at London's Royal Albert Hall, and they invited us to open that concert. So it was an amazing honor to perform at the Royal Albert Hall. At the time, this was one of the largest halls in Britain. We had also played the Festival Hall, but this was it, sort of, to us anyway, at the time. And so, remember, if you'll recall, that I had mentioned previously that we had vowed to have our duo somehow play at the Albert Hall.
Yep.
And there we were. We were sharing our songs with a sold-out crowd of over 5,000.
Wow. And
Yeah.
I had mentioned before, I had, when you had mentioned that earlier in the interview, I got goosebumps. And as it turned out, Kathy, even though you didn't know it at the time, at this sold-out Quintessence concert at such an illustrious venue as Royal Albert Hall, it turned out to be your final concert appearance. And what a way for Emily Muff to go out. he asked that we ended our discussion with that song, since it reminds her of Emily Muff's determination and courage to cross over the male-dominated line that existed in the music scene during that era. And she adds that, having broken through that barrier, Emily Muff continued to forge ahead, blazing a trail that still continues to inspire decades later.
Classic pop culture. It's classic pop culture. Hosted by Steve, Ludwig, and Ludwig. It's classic pop culture. It's classic pop culture. Classic pop culture.
Let's just get out of here.
Let's get out of here.
Let's get out of here!
Let's get out of here!
Let's get out of here!
Come on. Let's get out of here.
Let's get out of here.
Come on, let's get out of here.
Boss, let's get out of here.
It is getting crowded. Let's get out of here.